The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the wooden station in South Pass City, Wyoming, and Tessa Zimmerman pressed her face against the dusty window, watching as passengers began to disembark with their leather trunks and carpet bags, while she remained frozen in her seat with absolutely nothing to her name except the worn calico dress on her back and the shame burning in her chest. She had fled St. Louis 3 weeks ago with promises of a teaching position that turned out to be nothing more than a cruel hoax, and now the driver was demanding payment she could not provide. "Miss, I need the fare," the grizzled driver said through the window, his weathered face showing more exhaustion than sympathy. $2.50. Tessa swallowed hard, her throat dry from days of travel across the endless prairie. "I do not have it, sir. I was robbed in Cheyenne. They took everything." "That is not my problem, miss. Company policy says no fare, no ride. You should have said something before we left the last station." She climbed down from the coach, her legs shaky after so many hours cramped inside. The September sun beat down on South Pass City with relentless intensity, and she could see miners and cowboys watching the scene with casual interest. This town had sprung up around gold discoveries back in 1867, and now in 1878 it still carried that rough frontier spirit where weakness was exploited and kindness was rare. "Please, I have nowhere to go," Tessa said quietly, hating how her voice trembled. "If you could just give me a few days to find work." "Work?" The driver laughed harshly. "Look around, miss. This is a mining town. What kind of work do you think a woman finds here?" The implication stung, and Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. She was 22 years old, educated at a finishing school in Philadelphia, and now she stood in the dust of a Wyoming mining town with no money, no prospects, and no hope. "I will pay her fare." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady, and Tessa turned to see a tall cowboy standing a few feet away. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim pants, a chambray shirt faded from many washings, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. But even in that shadow, she could see eyes the color of stormy skies, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You will?" The driver looked skeptical. "Why would you do that?" The cowboy stepped forward and pulled coins from his pocket, counting out the exact fare into the driver's palm. "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over. That is why most of us came west, is it not?" The driver shrugged, pocketing the money. "Your funeral, cowboy. Just remember I warned you about getting involved with strange women." He climbed back onto his seat and snapped the reins, leaving Tessa standing in the street with her mysterious benefactor. She turned to face him fully now, able to see his features in the harsh afternoon light. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. There was something haunted in those gray eyes, a deep sadness that seemed permanently etched into his expression. "Thank you," Tessa said softly. "I will repay you as soon as I am able. No need." He started to turn away. "Wait, please." She took a step forward. "At least tell me your name so I know who to thank." He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he said, "James Novak. Most folks just call me Novak." "I am Tessa Zimmerman. I came here for a teaching position that does not exist, and now I find myself rather stranded." "There is no school here," Novak said bluntly. "The few families with children teach them at home or not at all. You were lied to, Miss Zimmerman. That much is clear." She looked around at the rough buildings lining the main street. "Is there a hotel where I might stay while I figure out what to do next?" "The Grand Hotel." He pointed to a 2-story wooden structure that looked anything but grand. "But it costs money, and unless you have some hidden away, you are going to need work before you need lodging." Then where do you suggest I go? Novak studied her for a long moment, and she could see the internal debate playing across his features. Finally, he sighed. There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Patricia Henshaw. She is a widow who takes in lodgers and serves meals. She might give you room and board in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning. Would you show me the way? I suppose I should, seeing as I just paid your passage. There was no humor in his tone, only resignation, as if helping her was both inevitable and burdensome. They walked down the dusty street together, Tessa acutely aware of the stares they received. South Pass City had clearly seen better days. Many of the buildings showed signs of decline, with broken windows and sagging porches. The gold rush that had brought thousands of prospectors had faded, leaving behind only those too stubborn or too poor to move on. How long have you lived here? Tessa asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. 3 years, and before that, Texas, then Colorado, then here. Each answer came out clipped and short, making it clear he had no interest in conversation. You are a man of few words, and you are a woman with too many questions. Despite her circumstances, Tessa felt a spark of irritation. I was simply trying to be friendly. You did pay my fare, after all. It seems reasonable to want to know something about you. Novak stopped walking and turned to face her. I paid your fare because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted conversation or friendship. Do not mistake kindness for interest, Miss Zimmerman. The words were harsh but not entirely unkind, and Tessa recognized the pain behind them. This was a man who had built walls around himself, high and thick, to keep the world at bay. I understand, she said quietly. I apologize for presuming. They continued in silence until they reached a neat white house with green shutters and a well-tended garden. Novak knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. Novak, she said warmly, what brings you here? Did you finally decide to take that room I offered? No, Mrs. Henshaw. I brought someone who needs your help. He stepped aside so Tessa could be seen. This is Miss Tessa Zimmerman. She came west under false pretenses and finds herself without money or prospects. I thought you might have use for an extra pair of hands in exchange for room and board. Mrs. Henshaw's shrewd eyes assessed Tessa from head to toe. Can you cook? Yes, madam. I can also sew, clean, do laundry, and keep accounts. A refined lady, I see. What brought you all the way to South Pass City? Tessa explained about the letter she had received promising a teaching position, the money she had spent on travel, and the robbery in Cheyenne that had left her destitute. Mrs. Henshaw listened with a sympathetic expression. I do need help, she admitted. I have 6 lodgers currently, and feeding and cleaning for them keeps me busy from dawn to dusk. If you are willing to work hard, I can give you a small room in the attic and 3 meals a day. No wages to start, but if you prove yourself, we can discuss payment after a month. That is more than generous, Mrs. Henshaw. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You have not experienced my standards. Mrs. Henshaw smiled to soften the words. Come inside and I will show you where you will sleep. Tessa turned to Novak, who had already begun to walk away. Mr. Novak, wait. He paused but did not turn around. Thank you, truly. I will not forget what you did for me today. He nodded once, a brief dip of his head, and then continued down the street without another word. Tessa watched him go, wondering what had happened to make such a young man so thoroughly closed off from human connection. Do not mind Novak, Mrs. Henshaw said gently. He has his reasons for being the way he is. Come along now and I will show you your quarters. The attic room was small and hot, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that overlooked the street. But it was clean and private, and after 3 weeks of uncertainty, It felt like a palace. Tessa sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, releasing all the fear and frustration she had held inside since leaving St. Louis. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face in the basin and went downstairs to begin her new life. Mrs. Henshaw put her to work immediately, showing her where everything was kept and explaining the routines of the household. There were 6 lodgers, all men who worked in the remaining mines or in trades that supported the mining industry. They took their meals together at a long table, and Mrs. Henshaw ran the establishment with firm but fair discipline. That evening, as Tessa helped serve supper, she found herself watching the door, half hoping Novak might appear. He did not, and she told herself it was foolish to think about a stranger who had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. Over the following days, Tessa threw herself into work with determined energy. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast, spent the mornings cleaning rooms and doing laundry, and devoted the afternoons to mending clothes and preparing dinner. Mrs. Henshaw was exacting but kind, and she seemed pleased with her new helper. On the 4th day, Tessa was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see Novak riding past on a sturdy bay gelding, leading a string of 3 other horses. He wore the same worn clothing and carried himself with that same guarded posture, but in the saddle he moved with effortless grace. "Good morning, Mr. Novak," she called out before she could stop herself. He reined in his horse and touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Zimmerman, I see Mrs. Henshaw put you to work." "She did indeed. I am grateful for it. You look better than you did the other day, less like you might faint in the street." "I felt rather close to it, I confess." She pinned a sheet to the line. "Are those your horses? I am a horse trader. I buy them wild or half-broken and train them for sale. That must require considerable skill and patience. It requires understanding. Horses are not so different from people. They respond to kindness better than force, but they also need to know who is in charge." It was the most he had said to her at one time, and Tessa felt encouraged. "Where do you keep them?" "I have a small ranch about 3 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, just a barn and a corral and a cabin." "You live alone?" Something shuddered in his expression. "Yes, I prefer it that way." Before she could respond, he touched his hat again and urged his horses forward, leaving her standing among the flapping sheets. But this time, Tessa thought she had seen something different in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity or interest before he had locked it away. Mrs. Henshaw came out with another basket of wet clothes. "I see you have been talking to our local hermit. He seems very lonely." "He is, but it is by choice." Mrs. Henshaw began hanging shirts on the line. "When he first came to South Pass City, he was different, friendly even. He worked as a ranch hand for the Morrison spread and was well liked. Then his wife and baby daughter arrived from Texas." Tessa's hand stilled. "He was married. Sarah was her name. Sweet thing, barely 20 years old. Their daughter Emma was just a year old with her father's gray eyes." Mrs. Henshaw's face grew somber. "There was a typhoid outbreak that winter. It swept through town like wildfire. Sarah and Emma both caught it. They died within days of each other." "Oh no." Tessa's heart clenched with sympathy. "How terrible." Novak buried them in the cemetery on the hill and never spoke of them again. He quit his job at the Morrison Ranch, bought that property outside town, and became the man you see now. Keeps to himself, does his work, and pushes away anyone who tries to get close. How long ago did this happen? 2 years this past winter. Some folks think he should be over it by now, but grief does not follow a schedule. He loved them deeply, and losing them broke something inside him. Tessa thought about this as she finished hanging the laundry. She understood now why Novak had helped her, a desperate stranger with nothing. He had seen someone in need and responded with compassion, even though he clearly did not want involvement. Perhaps somewhere beneath all that pain and isolation, his essential goodness still survived. The days turned into weeks, and autumn began to settle over Wyoming with cooler nights and golden aspens in the mountains. Tessa fell into a comfortable routine at the boarding house, and Mrs. Henshaw began paying her a small wage in addition to room and board. It was not much, but Tessa saved every penny, determined to build herself a future. She saw Novak occasionally in town, always at a distance. He would nod to her if their paths crossed, but he never stopped to talk. She found herself thinking about him more than she should, wondering what he was like before tragedy had stolen his family. Had he laughed easily? Had he been the kind of man who whistled while he worked and told stories in the evening? One Saturday morning in late October, Mrs. Henshaw sent Tessa to the general store with a list of supplies. The store was crowded with people stocking up for winter, and Tessa was comparing prices on flour sacks when she heard raised voices near the front. "I am telling you, I need another month to pay," a man was saying angrily. "The mine has not produced like it should. And I am telling you that I cannot extend more credit," the storekeeper replied. "You already owe me $30, Hutchins. I have a business to run. Just give me until December. I will pay every cent." "I have heard that before. No more credit until you settle your account." Tessa glanced over and saw a weathered miner with desperation in his eyes. She knew that look. She had worn it herself not so long ago. On impulse, she approached the counter. "Excuse me, but how much does Mr. Hutchins need for his supplies today?" The storekeeper frowned. $3.75, but that is not your concern, miss." Tessa opened her small purse and counted out the money. It represented 2 weeks of her wages, but she could not walk away. "Here, for his purchases." Hutchins stared at her in shock. "Miss, I cannot take your money. Consider it a loan, then. Pay me back when you are able." "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." "Because someone helped me when I had nothing. Perhaps this is my chance to pass that kindness forward." She completed her own purchases and left the store, feeling lighter despite having less money. She did not see Novak standing in the shadows of the neighboring building, watching the entire exchange with an expression of surprise and something that might have been respect. That evening there was a knock at the boarding house door. Mrs. Henshaw answered it and called up the stairs. "Tessa, you have a visitor." Tessa came down to find Novak standing in the hallway, turning his hat in his hands. He looked uncomfortable, as if he had debated whether to come and still was not sure it was the right decision. "Mr. Novak, this is unexpected. I was in town and thought I should check that you are doing well. As you can see, I am thriving, thanks to your generosity." He nodded, then seemed at a loss for what to say next. Finally, he said, "I heard about what you did for Hutchins at the store. Oh, word travels fast in a small town, I suppose. Why did you do it? That was probably money you could not afford to give away." Tessa met his eyes steadily. "You paid my fare when I had nothing. That act of kindness changed my life. I wanted to help someone else the way you helped me." Novak looked away, a muscle working in his jaw. "That is foolish. Hutchins is a drunk who will probably spend any money he makes on whiskey before he pays his debts. Perhaps, or perhaps he is just a man who has fallen on hard times and needs someone to believe in him. Belief does not put food on the table or pay the rent. No, but it can give someone the strength to keep trying when everything seems hopeless." She softened her tone. "I know something about hopelessness, Mr. Novak. So do you." He flinched as if she had struck him. "You do not know anything about me. I know you lost your wife and daughter. I know that grief turned you into someone who is afraid to care about anything or anyone. And I know that despite all that pain, you still have goodness in you. You proved that the day you paid my stagecoach fare. Mrs. Henshaw talks too much. She cares about you, as do several other people in this town, whether you want to acknowledge it or not." Novak put his hat back on, his expression closing down. "I should not have come here. Wait." Tessa touched his arm lightly. "I am sorry. I spoke out of turn. Please do not leave angry." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, and she saw something flicker in his eyes before he carefully stepped back. "I am not angry. I just do not see the point in talking about the past. It cannot be changed." "No, but the future can be. You are still young, Mr. Novak. You have years ahead of you. Do you truly want to spend them alone? It is safer that way. Caring about people means you can lose them. I will not go through that again." The rawness in his voice made Tessa's throat tighten. "I understand your fear. But closing yourself off means you have already lost everything. You are just doing it slowly instead of all at once." Novak stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Then he shook his head. "You are very young, Miss Zimmerman. You still believe that love conquers all and that broken things can be fixed with enough determination. Life will teach you otherwise. I am not as young or naive as you think. I have had my own losses and disappointments, but I choose to believe that giving up is worse than risking more pain." "Then you are braver than I am." He moved toward the door. "Good night, Miss Zimmerman. I hope Hutchins proves worthy of your faith." After he left, Tessa stood in the hallway feeling as if she had glimpsed something important but had not quite been able to grasp it. Mrs. Henshaw came out of the kitchen with knowing eyes. "That is the longest conversation James Novak has had with anyone in 2 years," she said quietly. "You are getting through to him, whether he wants to admit it or not." "I am not trying to get through to him. I just hate seeing someone suffer so needlessly." "Of course you are not trying." Mrs. Henshaw smiled. "And I am not trying to meddle. We are all just innocent bystanders to fate." November arrived with the first snow, dusting the mountains white and bringing a sharp bite to the air. Tessa had saved enough money to buy herself a warm coat and a pair of sturdy boots, and she felt a deep satisfaction in having earned these necessities through her own labor. Mrs. Henshaw had begun to rely on her heavily, and had even started teaching her the business side of running a boarding house. One afternoon, Tessa was returning from the post office when she heard shouting from the Silver Dollar Saloon. A moment later, the doors burst open and 2 men tumbled into the street, fists flying. A crowd quickly gathered to watch, and Tessa saw with dismay that one of the fighters was Hutchins, the miner she had helped at the store. He was clearly drunk and getting the worst of the fight. The other man, bigger and meaner, landed a solid punch that sent Hutchins sprawling in the mud. He stood over him, fists raised, ready to continue the beating. "That is enough." The voice was calm but carried complete authority. Novak stood at the edge of the crowd, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. He was not pointing it or even drawing it, but the threat was clear. The bigger man spat blood into the dirt. "This is not your fight, Novak. It is now. Hutchins is down. The fight is over. He owes me money. $15 from a card game last month. Then take him to the sheriff and file a complaint, but you are not going to beat him to death in the street." The 2 men stared at each other, and Tessa held her breath. Finally, the bigger man backed down, cursing under his breath as he stomped back into the saloon. The crowd dispersed, disappointed that the entertainment had ended. Novak helped Hutchins to his feet. The miner was bleeding from his nose and could barely stand. Novak looked around and his eyes found Tessa. "Miss Zimmerman, do you still have faith in this man?" She hurried forward. "Mr. Hutchins, are you badly hurt?" "I am fine, miss. Just my pride is damaged." He swayed on his feet. "He needs to sleep this off somewhere safe," Novak said. If he goes home like this, his wife will either kill him or throw him out, and he will probably freeze to death in a ditch. Bring him to the boarding house. We have an empty room and I will clean him up." Novak raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Henshaw might have something to say about that. "Then I will handle Mrs. Henshaw. Help me get him there." Between the two of them, they managed to half-carry the drunken miner to the boarding house. Mrs. Henshaw met them at the door with her hands on her hips and disapproval written clearly on her face. But when Tessa explained what had happened, the older woman sighed and stepped aside. "Put him in the back room. But if he vomits on my clean floors, someone is going to mop it up and it will not be me." They settled Hutchins on the bed and Tessa brought warm water and clean cloths to tend his injuries. Novak stood in the doorway, watching her work with a strange expression. "You keep trying to save people," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because people saved me. You saved me." She wrung out the cloth. "And because I think everyone deserves a second chance. Even drunks who gamble away money they do not have, even them. Mr. Hutchins is trying. He just needs help. You are going to be disappointed. People do not change, Miss Zimmerman. They only become more of what they already are." "Is that what you believe about yourself? That you are destined to remain bitter and isolated forever?" Novak's jaw tightened. "I am not bitter. I am realistic. You are afraid. There is a difference. You presume a great deal. Someone has to. You have been hiding for 2 years, and everyone has been letting you. Maybe what you need is someone who will challenge you to live again instead of just existing." She finished cleaning Hutchins's face and stood up, facing Novak directly. He was taller than her by several inches, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. What she saw there made her heart beat faster. It was not anger or irritation. It was hunger, a deep longing that he was trying desperately to suppress. "Why do you care?" he asked roughly. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "I do not know," Tessa admitted. "But I do. From the moment you paid my fare, I have cared. Maybe because you were the first person in a long time to show me genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. Or maybe because I recognize a wounded soul when I see one and I want to help it heal. You cannot heal me. No one can. Perhaps not, but that does not mean I will stop trying." They stood there in the small room with the unconscious miner snoring between them, and something shifted. It was subtle, like ice beginning to crack under the pressure of spring warmth, but Tessa felt it clearly. Novak was still fighting against connection, but his defenses were weakening. "I should go," he said, but he did not move. "Will you come for dinner tomorrow, Mrs. Henshaw makes roast chicken on Sundays, and there is always plenty." "I do not think that is a good idea." "Why not? Are you afraid of a home-cooked meal?" "I am afraid of what you want from me." Tessa stepped closer, her voice gentle. "I do not want anything except to see you smile, just once. I think you have a beautiful smile hidden somewhere under all that sadness. You have never seen me smile. I know. That is why I want to." Novak reached out as if to touch her face, then dropped his hand. "You are playing with fire, Miss Zimmerman. Then let me burn." He turned and left without another word, but Tessa knew he would come to dinner. She could not explain how she knew, but she was certain of it. Sure enough, the next evening, just as Mrs. Henshaw was carving the chicken, there was a knock at the door. Novak stood on the porch, clean-shaven and wearing what was clearly his best shirt. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Miss Zimmerman invited me to dinner, if the offer still stands." Mrs. Henshaw beamed. "Of course it does. Come in, James. You are always welcome at my table." The meal was awkward at first. The lodgers were surprised to see Novak, who had never accepted previous invitations, and they tried to include him in conversation. He answered politely but briefly, clearly unused to social interaction. Tessa watched him from across the table, noting how he held himself rigid, as if ready to flee at any moment. After dinner, While Mrs. Henshaw and the lodgers retired to the parlor, Tessa asked Novak if he would like to sit on the porch. The evening was cold but clear, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you for coming," she said, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I know it was difficult for you. It was not as terrible as I expected." There was a hint of wry humor in his voice. "What a glowing endorsement. I am out of practice with people. Then we will have to get you back into practice." She looked up at the stars. "Tell me about Texas. What was it like? Hot, flat, full of longhorns and drought." He paused, "but beautiful in its own way. Sunsets that painted the whole sky red and gold. Wildflowers in spring that covered the ground like a carpet. I thought I would live there my whole life." "What made you leave?" "After Sarah and Emma died, I could not stay. Everything reminded me of them. The house we had lived in, the church where we were married, the cemetery where they were buried. I needed to go somewhere they had never been, where every corner did not hold a memory." "But you brought the memories with you. Geography cannot change that." "No. But at least here I am not constantly seeing the places where we were happy. That makes it slightly more bearable." Tessa turned to face him. "What was she like?" "Sarah." Most people would have refused to answer, would have shut down at such a personal question. But something in Novak seemed to crack open, as if he had been holding these words inside for so long that they had to come out. "She was sunshine. That is the only way I can describe her. She lit up every room she entered. She laughed easily and loved deeply and saw good in everyone." His voice grew rough. "Emma was just like her. Even as a baby, she was always smiling. When she learned to walk, she would toddle around touching everything, curious about the whole world. They sound wonderful, they were, and I failed them." The anguish in his voice was raw and terrible. "I was supposed to protect them. That is what a husband and father does. But I could not save them from typhoid. I could not even get a doctor quickly enough because the only one in town was already sick himself. I had to watch them suffer and die, and there was nothing I could do." Tessa reached out and took his hand. He flinched but did not pull away. "It was not your fault. Disease is not something you can fight with strength or will. You did everything you could. It was not enough. Sometimes our best is not enough. That does not make it your fault." She squeezed his hand gently. "They loved you. I am certain of that. And they would not want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for something you could not control. How do you know what they would want? Because love does not seek to cause pain. If Sarah loved you the way you clearly loved her, she would want you to find happiness again. Not to forget her, but to honor her memory by living fully." Novak was silent for a long moment, staring out at the dark street. Then he said quietly, "You are dangerous, Tessa Zimmerman." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent warmth through her chest. "Why is that?" "Because you make me want things I thought I would never want again. You make me hope, and hope is the most painful thing in the world when it is taken away. Then do not let it be taken away. Hold on to it. Fight for it." He turned to look at her, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, she could see the conflict in his face. "I do not know if I can. I do not know if I have that kind of courage. You have more courage than you realize. You get up every morning and face a world that took everything from you. You work and survive and even help strangers. That takes tremendous strength, or cowardice. Maybe I am just too afraid to follow them into death. That is not cowardice. That is survival, and there is honor in survival." Novak stood up, still holding her hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. They stood close together in the cold night air, their breath making small clouds between them. "I need to go slowly," he said. "I cannot promise you anything. I do not even know if I can ever love anyone again. I am not asking for promises. I am only asking for a chance." He studied her face as if memorizing it, then lifted his free hand and gently touched her cheek. It was the first truly tender gesture he had made, and Tessa felt tears prick her eyes at the sweetness of it. "You deserve someone whole," he said quietly. "Not someone broken like me. We are all broken in some way. The question is whether we let those broken pieces define us or whether we use them to create something new. When did you become so wise?" "When I had to flee my home with nothing and rebuild my life from scratch. Adversity teaches lessons that comfort never can." Novak smiled then. It was small and tentative, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. Tessa caught her breath at how handsome he was when that terrible sadness lifted, even for a moment. "There," she whispered. "That is what I wanted to see." "What?" "Your smile. It is every bit as beautiful as I imagined." He shook his head, but the smile lingered. "You are incorrigible. And you are worth fighting for." He left soon after, but something fundamental had changed between them. Over the following weeks, Novak began to appear more frequently in town, and more often than not, his errands seemed to bring him past the boarding house. He would stop to talk with Tessa if she was outside, or he would accept invitations to dinner. The conversations grew longer and easier, and Tessa began to learn more about the man behind the walls. He told her about his childhood on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His father had been a hard man who believed in tough love and harder work, but his mother had been gentle and kind, balancing her husband's severity. Novak had learned about horses from his oldest brother, and he had discovered he had a natural gift for understanding them. "Horses do not lie," he told Tessa one afternoon as they walked along the edge of town. "They tell you exactly what they are feeling if you know how to read them. A flick of an ear, the position of their tail, the way they hold their weight. Every movement is communication." "I think people are the same," Tessa said. "We just hide it better." "That is the problem. All that hiding makes it hard to trust what anyone says." "Then what am I telling you right now?" He stopped walking and turned to study her. "You are telling me that you are happy, that you feel safe. That you are interested in me but trying not to show it too much because you are afraid of scaring me away." Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "Am I that transparent?" "Only because I have started paying attention." His voice was soft. "And you are right to be cautious. I am still scared. Every time I start to feel something for you, every time I catch myself looking forward to seeing you, there is a voice in my head warning me not to care, not to risk that kind of loss again." "What do you do when you hear that voice?" "Lately, I tell it to be quiet. Because the thought of not seeing you, not talking to you, has become more frightening than the thought of caring." They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. In the distance, Tessa could see mountains dusted with snow against a brilliant blue sky. It was beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, much like the life people built here. "Will you show me your ranch?" she asked. "I would like to see where you live if you are willing." Novak hesitated, and she could see the internal struggle. His ranch was his sanctuary, the place where he had hidden from the world. Inviting her there would be a significant step, an acknowledgement that he was letting her into his life in a deeper way. "All right," he said finally, "but not today. Next Sunday if the weather holds. I will borrow a buggy from the livery and pick you up after church." "I look forward to it." The week passed slowly for Tessa, filled with anticipation. She found herself daydreaming about Novak when she should have been working, earning teasing looks from Mrs. Henshaw. "You are falling in love with him," the older woman said one evening as they washed dishes together. "I barely know him." The heart does not require lengthy acquaintance. Sometimes it simply knows. "Even if I am falling in love, that does not mean anything will come of it." "He is still grieving his wife and daughter." "He is healing," Mrs. Henshaw corrected. "Thanks in large part to you. I have seen more life in him these past few weeks than in the 2 years since his family died. You have given him something to live for beyond mere survival. I do not want to be a replacement for what he lost. You are not. You are something entirely new. Sarah was his past, and he will always love her memory. But you are his potential future if he can find the courage to embrace it. Sunday arrived clear and cold. Tessa dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue wool that Mrs. Henshaw had helped her sew from fabric purchased with her wages. She pinned up her dark blonde hair and studied herself in the small mirror, hoping she looked presentable. Novak arrived precisely at noon driving a small buggy pulled by a pretty chestnut mare. He helped Tessa up onto the seat and tucked a blanket around her legs against the cold. As they drove out of town, Tessa felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. "The mare is beautiful," she said, admiring the horse's graceful movement. "Is she one of yours?" "I trained her last year. Sold her to the livery stable owner for his daughter, but he lets me borrow her occasionally." Novak guided the horse onto a rutted trail that wound through sagebrush and scattered pines. "Her name is Rosie." "Did you name her?" The daughter did. "She is 12 and believes every horse should have a flower name." There was affection in his voice, and Tessa realized he had a soft spot for children despite his loss. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Tessa enjoyed the vast openness of the landscape. After the crowded streets of St. Louis and even the small confines of South Pass City, this emptiness felt both liberating and slightly frightening. "There," Novak said, pointing ahead. "That is my place." Tessa saw a small cabin made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney from which smoke curled. Nearby stood a barn and a large corral where several horses moved about. It was simple and isolated, but there was something appealing about its self-sufficiency. Novak helped her down from the buggy and led her toward the corral. The horses came to the fence, curious about the visitor. They were in various stages of training, from a wild-eyed Mustang that shied away from Novak's approach to a calm buckskin that nuzzled his hand seeking treats. "This is what I do," Novak said, gesturing to the horses. "I buy them wild or cheap because they have bad habits, and I teach them to trust humans again. Then I sell them to ranchers or families who need good, reliable mounts. It must take tremendous patience. It takes understanding. Most of these horses were not born mean or difficult. They became that way because someone treated them badly. My job is to show them that not all humans are cruel, that partnership is possible." "You are talking about more than horses, are you not?" He glanced at her, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Perhaps. Come inside. I will make coffee." The cabin was small but surprisingly neat. A rope bed stood in one corner, covered with a colorful quilt. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and a cook stove stood against one wall. Shelves held supplies and a few books. It was the home of a man who lived simply and asked little from life. What struck Tessa most were the photographs. There was only one, sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. It showed a young woman holding a baby, both smiling at the camera. Sarah and Emma. Tessa studied the photograph, seeing the joy in Sarah's face, the love shining from her eyes. "That was taken 3 months before they died," Novak said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "A traveling photographer came through our town, and Sarah insisted we have a picture made. I did not want to spend the money, but she said it was important to capture the moment. She was right. It is all I have left of them now. She was beautiful. She was everything." His voice was thick with emotion. "And I do not know how to let her go." Tessa turned to face him. "You do not have to let her go. She will always be part of you, part of your story. But James, she is gone. And you are still here, still alive. You have to decide whether you are going to truly live or just mark time until you die. I do not know if I can love like that again. That kind of love requires complete vulnerability, and I am not sure I can survive being that exposed. Love always requires vulnerability. That is what makes it powerful and terrifying. She reached up and gently touched his face. But the alternative is spending your life alone, never feeling that connection again. Is that really what you want? No. The word came out as barely a whisper. God help me, no. When I am with you, I feel like maybe I could live again. Maybe I could be something other than a ghost haunting my own life. Then be with me. Not as a replacement for what you lost, but as something new. Let yourself feel again. Novak closed his eyes, and Tessa saw a tear slide down his cheek. Without thinking, she stood on her toes and kissed it away. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. I am so afraid, he whispered. I am afraid of caring and losing again. I am afraid I will disappoint you. I am afraid I do not know how to be whole anymore. You do not have to be whole. You just have to be willing to try. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. I am not asking for perfection, James. I am just asking for honesty and effort. They stood there in the small cabin, holding each other as if they could anchor one another against all the storms of life. Tessa felt his heart beating against her cheek and knew that her own heart was beating in rhythm with his. Whatever this was between them, it was real and powerful and worth fighting for. After a while, Novak pulled back and wiped his eyes, looking embarrassed. I apologize. I do not usually fall apart like that. Do not apologize for feeling. It means you are human. He managed a shaky smile. I still owe you coffee. They sat at his small table drinking strong coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Novak told her about the horses he was currently training, the challenges each one presented. Tessa told him about the lodgers at the boarding house, their quirks and kindnesses. It was ordinary conversation, the kind shared by people growing comfortable with each other, and that very ordinariness felt precious. As the afternoon wore on, Tessa reluctantly said she needed to return. Mrs. Henshaw would worry if she stayed too late, and propriety demanded she not spend too many hours alone with an unmarried man. Novak drove her back to town as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thank you for today, Tessa said as they pulled up in front of the boarding house, for showing me your home and for trusting me with your feelings. Thank you for not running away when you saw how damaged I am. You are not damaged, you are grieving. There is a difference. He helped her down from the buggy, and before she could step away, he caught her hand. Tessa, I cannot promise this will be easy. I have dark days when I can barely get out of bed. I have nightmares about watching them die. I have moments when the guilt nearly crushes me. If you are hoping for some fairy tale romance, you should know that is not what I can offer. I am not looking for a fairy tale. I am looking for something real. And real includes dark days and nightmares and guilt. What matters is that we face those things together instead of alone. Together, he repeated, as if testing the word. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender that Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. I will see you soon. Over the following months, their relationship deepened slowly and carefully. Novak courted her with old-fashioned formality, bringing small gifts when he came to town. Wildflowers in summer, a smooth stone he thought was pretty, a book of poetry he had ordered from a catalog. They went on walks and attended church together and sat on Mrs. Henshaw's porch talking until late in the evening. There were difficult moments. One night in January, Novak showed up at the boarding house in the middle of a blizzard, wild-eyed and shaking. It was the anniversary of Sarah and Emma's deaths, and he had spent the day at their graves until he could not bear the solitude anymore. Tessa bundled him inside and made him sit by the fire while she heated soup. She did not ask questions or offer platitudes. She simply sat with him, holding his hand, letting him know he was not alone. Eventually, he started talking, pouring out memories of his wife and daughter, the happy times and the terrible end. He cried openly, and Tessa cried with him, grieving for the family he had lost and the pain he still carried. "I am sorry," he said when the storm of emotion had passed. "This is not fair to you. Love is not about fair. It is about being present in the hard moments as well as the good ones." "You love me." He looked at her with such vulnerable hope that her heart ached. "Yes, I love you, James Novak. I love your strength and your gentleness and your wounded heart. I love the way you care for your horses and the way you still help people even when you pretend not to care. I love all of you, even the broken parts. I do not deserve you. That is not your decision to make. I choose you. Every day I choose you." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you too. I did not think I could love again, but you have somehow made it possible. You have given me a reason to believe that life can be good again, that happiness is not just a memory." They sat together by the fire until the blizzard passed, and when Novak finally left to return to his ranch, Tessa knew they had crossed some important threshold. They had faced his grief together and come through it stronger. Spring arrived with a rush of warmth and growth. The snow melted from the mountains, filling the streams, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Tessa had been in South Pass City for nearly a year now, and she had built a life she was proud of. Mrs. Henshaw had made her a full partner in the boarding house, and she had a small savings account at the bank. More importantly, she had love. Novak had changed dramatically over the winter. He smiled more readily now and engaged with the community. He no longer flinched when people mentioned Sarah and Emma, though he still visited their graves regularly. He had made peace with his past, not by forgetting it, but by accepting that he could honor their memory while still building a future. One Sunday morning in April, after church services, Novak asked Tessa to take a walk with him. They strolled through town and out onto the open prairie, where the new grass was just beginning to turn green. Birds sang in the bushes, and the air smelled of earth and growing things. "I have been thinking about the future," Novak said as they walked. "About what I want my life to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And what do you want? I want you in it. Not just as someone I court or spend time with, but as my wife, my partner. The mother of my children, if God grants us that blessing." Tessa stopped walking, her heart pounding. "James, are you asking what I think you are asking?" He turned to face her and dropped to one knee right there in the prairie grass. From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold band. "This was my mother's ring. She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone I loved as much as I loved her. Sarah had her own ring, so I have kept this one safe. Tessa Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a broken man who loves you more than he ever thought possible?" "Yes." The word came out as a joyful cry. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood up, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time, a kiss full of promise and passion and hope. Tessa kissed him back with all the love in her heart, knowing that this was exactly where she was meant to be. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in South Pass City, with Mrs. Henshaw and the boarding house lodgers in attendance. Hutchins was there too, sober for 6 months now and working steadily in a mine that had started producing again. He had paid back Tessa's loan with interest, and he credited her faith in him with saving his life. Tessa wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henshaw had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Novak wore a new suit ordered from Denver, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness, for all the days of their lives. After the ceremony, they had a celebration at the boarding house with cake and dancing. As Tessa waltzed with her new husband, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. If someone had told her a year ago, when she was standing in the dust of this town with no money and no prospects, that she would find love and happiness here, she would not have believed them. But life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. What are you thinking about? Novak asked, his breath warm against her ear. About the day we met, how desperate and hopeless I felt, how you paid my fare and changed my life. You changed mine too. You gave me a reason to believe again, a reason to live instead of just existing. We saved each other. We did. They moved to Novak's ranch after the wedding, and Tessa threw herself into making the cabin a home. She sewed curtains for the windows and planted a vegetable garden behind the house. She learned about horses under Novak's patient instruction, discovering that she had a natural empathy with the animals. Together, they expanded the business, buying more horses and earning a reputation for quality training. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They had to learn each other's rhythms and habits, had to navigate disagreements and misunderstandings. There were nights when Novak had nightmares about Sarah and Emma, and Tessa would hold him until the dreams passed. There were moments when Tessa felt inadequate, as if she could never measure up to the memory of his first wife. But they talked through these difficulties with honesty and love, and each challenge overcome only strengthened their bond. In the spring of 1880, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy mixed with anxiety, particularly for Novak, whose fear of loss had not entirely disappeared. But Tessa's pregnancy progressed smoothly and healthily, and slowly Novak allowed himself to believe that this time would be different. Their son was born in December, a cold night when the stars seemed to burn with unusual brightness. He was healthy and strong, with his father's gray eyes and a powerful set of lungs. They named him Thomas, and when Novak held him for the first time, Tessa saw the last remnants of his old grief finally release their hold. He wept openly, kissing his son's forehead, whispering promises to love and protect him. "Thank you," he said to Tessa, his voice breaking. "Thank you for giving me this gift, for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself, for loving me back to life. You did the same for me," she reminded him. "We are a team, remember? We face everything together." Raising Thomas brought new joys and new challenges. The ranch thrived as word spread about Novak's skill with horses, and they were able to build a larger barn and buy more land. Mrs. Henshaw visited frequently, delighted to spoil her honorary grandson. Hutchins, now completely sober and working as a foreman at the mine, became an unlikely friend to the family, often stopping by to help with heavy work around the ranch. 3 years later, they welcomed twin daughters, Catherine and Margaret, who were as different as night and day despite being born minutes apart. Catherine was quiet and thoughtful, happiest when reading or drawing. Margaret was wild and adventurous, always trying to follow her father to the corrals to work with the horses. The cabin had grown too small for their expanding family, so Novak built a proper house with the help of neighbors and friends. It was a simple 2-story structure, but it had bedrooms for all the children and a large kitchen where the family gathered for meals. Tessa filled it with warmth and laughter, creating the kind of home she had always dreamed of. One evening in the summer of 1885, after the children had been put to bed, Novak and Tessa sat on the porch watching the sunset. 7 years had passed since that day at the stagecoach station, and they had built a remarkable life together. "You ever think about how we met?" Tessa asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "All the time. I think about how close I came to just walking past you that day. I almost did, you know. I saw you arguing with the driver and thought it was none of my business. What made you stop? Your eyes." Even from a distance, I could see the determination in them. You were terrified and desperate, but you had not given up. There was steel in you, and I respected that. Plus, I remembered what it felt like to have nothing and need help. I am grateful you stopped. I hate to think what would have happened to me if you had not. You would have survived. You are a survivor, Tessa. You always have been. Maybe, but surviving is not the same as living. You taught me that. Novak turned to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that still made her heart race after all these years. "We taught each other. That is what love does. It takes two broken pieces and makes them whole." "You still miss them?" Tessa asked softly. "Sarah and Emma, sometimes. But it is different now. I can remember them with gratitude instead of just pain. I can honor the love we shared without it consuming my present. You did that for me. You showed me that the heart is big enough to hold both past and present, memory and hope. I love you, James Novak." "I love you, Tessa Novak, forever and always." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the horses moved peacefully in their corrals. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. Life in the Wyoming territory was hard and unpredictable, but they had found something precious here in this wild land. They had found each other and they had found home. As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew and prospered. Thomas became an excellent horseman, working alongside his father and showing the same natural gift for understanding horses. Catherine discovered a talent for keeping accounts and managing the business side of the operation. Margaret, as wild as ever, had a special way with the most difficult horses, the ones that seemed beyond help. When Thomas turned 18 in 1898, Novak officially made him a partner in the business. The ranch now employed several hands and had earned a reputation throughout Wyoming and beyond for producing the finest trained horses in the region. Tessa had started a small school on the property, teaching not only her own children, but also the children of ranch hands and neighbors, finally fulfilling her original dream of being a teacher. Novak, now in his 50s, had gray threading through his dark hair, but he still moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his body and his life. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes for so long had been replaced by contentment and quiet joy. He was a man at peace with himself and his place in the world. One afternoon, as Tessa helped Novak mend a section of fence, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you remember when you told me that broken things could not be fixed?" she asked. Novak smiled, the expression coming easily now. "I remember. I also remember you refusing to believe me. You were wrong, you know. Broken things can be fixed. They just require patience and love and belief that healing is possible. You fixed me. No, we fixed each other. That is what love does. It does not make everything perfect, but it makes the imperfections bearable. It turns surviving into thriving." He set down his hammer and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly despite the audience of curious horses. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "Well, second best." "Second." She pretended to be offended. "First was deciding to pay your stagecoach fare that day. That act led to everything else." "So you are saying I am a consequence of your good deed?" I am saying you are the reward for the one truly unselfish thing I did in the depths of my grief. I helped a stranger, and in return, I received a lifetime of love. That is the way it should work. Kindness creating more kindness. Love generating more love. Then we need to make sure our children understand that. The world needs more kindness, more people willing to help strangers. They understand. Look at Thomas. Last week, he spent his own money to buy supplies for the Harris family when their father was injured. And Catherine has been teaching the Wilson children to read even though they cannot pay. And Margaret donated 3 of her best drawings to be auctioned for the church fund. They learned it from watching you, Novak said. You are the kindest person I have ever known. I learned it from you. You paid my fare when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose emotionally. That act of grace changed both our lives. They finished the fence repair and walked back to the house hand in hand, a gesture as natural after 20 years of marriage as breathing. Inside, Catherine was preparing dinner while Margaret set the table. Thomas came in from the barn, talking about a particularly stubborn gelding he was working with. This was family. This was home. This was the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination and love. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Novak and Tessa sat together in their bedroom. He had long ago put away the photograph of Sarah and Emma, not out of disrespect, but because he no longer needed the visual reminder. They lived in his heart, a cherished memory, but they no longer dominated his present. I have been thinking, Novak said, brushing Tessa's hair as she sat at her dressing table. About the future. We are getting old to be thinking about the future, Tessa teased. We should be thinking about the past and complaining about our aches and pains. I am serious. Thomas will inherit the ranch. That is appropriate, but I want to make sure Catherine and Margaret are provided for as well. We have already discussed this. Catherine will receive a sum to start her own business if she wishes, and Margaret will have the same. I know, but I want to do more. I want to establish a fund at the church, something to help people who find themselves in desperate situations. People like you were when you arrived here. I want to pay forward the kindness I showed you that day. Tessa turned to look at her husband, love swelling in her chest. That is a beautiful idea. We will call it the Second Chance Fund. Anyone who needs help, whether it is money for travel or supplies or education, can apply. No one should have to feel as hopeless as we both felt. As you felt when you lost Sarah and Emma, as I felt when I stood in the street with no fare and no future. Exactly. We found our way through, but we were lucky. Many people are not so fortunate. If we can help even a few people, it will be worth it. They established the fund that fall, endowing it with a substantial portion of their savings. The church agreed to administer it, and word spread quickly. Over the next several years, dozens of people received help through the Second Chance Fund. Young men trying to start businesses, widows struggling to feed their children, families displaced by drought or disaster. Each person who was helped heard the story of how the fund came to be, the tale of a cowboy who paid a stranger's fare and found love in return. In 1905, Tessa and Novak celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. Their children were grown now, building their own lives. Thomas had married a rancher's daughter and had given them 2 grandchildren. Catherine had opened a bookshop in South Pass City, fulfilling her dream of being surrounded by stories. Margaret had surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in Wyoming to do so. Mrs. Henshaw had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years earlier, leaving the boarding house to Tessa. They had converted it into a home for women in difficult circumstances, another way of helping those who needed a second chance. Novak's hair was completely gray now, and he moved more slowly than he once had. Tessa had laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her hair. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that day at the stagecoach station. A desperate woman with nothing and a broken man who had forgotten how to hope. "We have had a good life," Novak said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. "We have had a wonderful life," Tessa corrected, "full of love and purpose and meaning. Do you have any regrets? Only that we did not have more time." "But I suppose everyone wishes for more time when they have been happy." "I used to pray for time to end," Novak admitted. "After Sarah and Emma died, I wanted nothing more than to follow them. I went through the motions of living, but I was already dead inside. And now I want every moment I can get, every sunrise, every meal with you, every story about our grandchildren, every quiet evening on this porch. You gave me that, Tessa. You gave me the gift of wanting to live. You gave me the same gift. When I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing, I thought my life was over. I thought I had made such terrible mistakes that I would never recover. But you showed me that mistakes are just opportunities for new beginnings. We saved each other. We did." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. This moment, like so many others they had shared, would become a memory, another thread in the tapestry of their life together. Novak lived to see his 73rd birthday, and when he passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1921, he was surrounded by family. Tessa held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for the life they had shared. At his funeral, their children and grandchildren spoke of his kindness, his integrity, and his devotion to family. Tessa lived another 8 years, spending her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, managing the Second Chance Fund, and writing down the story of how she and Novak had met and fallen in love. She wanted future generations to understand that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that kindness could change lives, and that it was never too late for a second chance. When she passed away in 1929 at the age of 73, she was buried next to Novak on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her children found her memoir among her papers, and they had it published privately. The book was titled The Fare He Paid, and it told the complete story of how a cowboy's simple act of generosity had led to a lifetime of love. The Second Chance Fund continued long after both of them were gone, helping hundreds of people over the decades. Every recipient learned the story of Tessa and Novak, and many were inspired to pay forward the kindness they had received. The fund still exists today, now administered by the couple's descendants, a lasting legacy of two people who understood that love and kindness are the greatest gifts we can give. Thomas inherited the ranch and ran it successfully for another 40 years before passing it to his own son. The property remained in the family, and the house that Novak built still stands, now carefully preserved as a historical site. Visitors can see the porch where Tessa and Novak sat on countless evenings, the barn where they trained horses together, and the hillside where they rest side by side. Catherine's bookshop also survived, eventually expanding into a regional chain that her descendants still operate. Every store features a special section devoted to stories of second chances and unexpected love, a tribute to her mother's belief in the power of hope and determination. Margaret's veterinary practice became legendary in Wyoming, and she trained dozens of other women to follow in her footsteps. She never married, claiming that she had witnessed such perfect love between her parents that anything less would be a disappointment. Instead, she devoted her life to healing animals and helping people, embodying the values Tessa and Novak had taught her. The tale of the cowboy who paid a stranger's fare became one of those stories that parents told children, that preachers used in sermons, that teachers shared to illustrate the power of compassion. It was a reminder that small acts of kindness can have ripple effects far beyond what we can imagine, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that it is never too late to begin again. In South Pass City, now a quiet historical town rather than the rough mining settlement it once was, there is a bronze statue in the town square. It shows a man and a woman standing together, looking toward the horizon with hope in their faces. The plaque reads, "In memory of James Novak and Tessa Zimmerman Novak, who proved that kindness creates kindness, love generates love, and every person deserves a second chance." Their story reminds us that the smallest gestures can change lives and that true love can bloom even in the hardest soil. Tourists come to take pictures with the statue, and locals still tell stories about the real people it represents. Some of the stories have been embellished over time, as stories tend to be, but the core truth remains unchanged. A broken man helped a desperate woman, and in doing so, they saved each other. They built a life of meaning and purpose, raised a family that carried on their values, and left a legacy that continues to touch lives more than a century after they met. That is the power of choosing kindness over indifference, hope over despair, love over fear. That is the lesson Tessa and Novak learned together and taught to everyone whose lives they touched. It is a lesson that remains relevant and vital, reminding us that we all have the power to change someone's life for the better, if only we have the courage to act when the moment presents itself. Their story did not end with their deaths. It continues in every person helped by the Second Chance Fund, in every descendant who carries their values forward, in every visitor who stands before that bronze statue and is inspired to show kindness to a stranger. Love, it turns out, is the only thing that truly transcends death, the only legacy that matters in the end. And so the cowboy and the woman he helped live on, not just in memory, but in the ongoing impact of their choices. They would have been humbled to know how far their influence spread, how many lives were touched by their example. But they would also have been pleased, because at its heart, their story was always about the simple truth that we are all connected, that helping others helps ourselves, and that love in all its forms is the greatest adventure life has to offer. In the end, that day at the stagecoach station in South Pass City, Wyoming, in September of 1878, was not just a meeting between two strangers. It was the beginning of a love story that would span decades, touch hundreds of lives, and prove that sometimes, when we reach out to help someone who has nothing, we receive everything we never knew we needed.